Welcome to episode 28 of the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. And today we're talking about a very interesting technique with your shutter speed.
Yes, we are talking about long exposure. I know Henry and I do lots of it. And that's probably a big bulk of our outdoor nature photography. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, especially if I'm around water, it's not frozen, I'm doing a long exposure of some capacity.
Yeah. Same here. It's just something that I've really grown to like, and I'd probably put it in like if you want to like break it down by genre, I guess. I'd probably put it in like my top three most used techniques when I'm like out in the field. Yeah, like you said, with flowing water, it's just so much fun. But you can also use it with other techniques and other different subject matter as well.
Yeah, it's very versatile.
Hmm
And it's kind of like the hidden art of cameras, I feel like
hmm
the the beginner just really doesn't know about it, but once you kind of unlock that, it gets crazy, like the amount of stuff you can do with it.
I think like because I have exhibits of my work and everything in galleries and other places or have previously, and like people seem to be really maybe the non-photographer people will say they seem really drawn to those silky smooth like water flowing photographs, and they're like, "How'd you take those?" Because they're so interested in that. And I think it's because like most of us with our phones can't quite capture that same feeling as you can with like a traditional like a DSLR, and it doesn't work the same way with long exposure. You can't really replicate that look, I guess.
Yeah, that's for sure. Even if there's like a long exposure setting on your phone.
Is that a thing really?
Hello,
Hello.
I cut out. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I'll just continue. Right. All right. So even if like your phone has like some phones I know nowadays have like a long exposure ability, it's really not the same because like with like a DSLR or like a mirrorless camera, you can really just experiment with different shutter speeds. Like you don't even always have to do like the longest one. You can like experiment and see what looks best with water, and it's just really versatile.
hmm Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, I really I don't think my phone has that feature, but that's something I'd really like to try someday. You know, if I do get an upgraded
Mhm.
phone, I guess.
Yeah, I think the new like iPhones do
Hmm,
for sure.
that's interesting. Taking notes, I guess. You know, put on like a little tabletop tripod, I guess, or I don't know how else you'd mount that. Prop it up against something like a
Mhm.
wall. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, I've seen people put their phones on full tripods for long exposures.
Hmm,
I
that's a new
still
one.
don't think it really, I still don't think it really captures the essence of it though. I think it's
Yeah,
going to be a while till that really catches up.
I think it's like the depth of it. Like if it can mimic or I guess replicate the shutter speed, then it might work. But like it doesn't have the same depth as like a glass lens would. Just my opinion, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
larger sensor look as well.
hmm
Because I was actually reading about long exposures a while back. And even if you're at like ISO 100 or 800 or something, you still get noise in your long exposures. Like there's something that goes on with the process that introduces noise. And on a phone, that could be pretty bad with longer exposures. So you really need that nice and large sensor to like soak in all the light.
So again, yeah, it probably overheats too, I'd imagine. But you know, just an idea.
Yeah,
If it's really like drawing out
especially
that shutter.
yeah, since it's an electronic sensor, getting kind of technical on the phones,
hmm
it has to like scan it. Versus with on a DSLR mirrorless, it's mechanical, so it's just
I was gonna
taking the
say.
information out of the sensor.
Yeah, there's no moving parts on the phone per se, but like the actual camera would, you know, obviously have a shutter and aperture and parts of the mirror flipping and locking up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, we might as well like turn back around to the start here. Now, like, what exactly is long exposure? How would you describe it, Henry?
So I would say long exposure is anything past like 1/10 of a second on a camera. So any shutter speed that introduces like a lot of motion into an image. Uh, I'd say long exposure is mostly like a landscape thing, but it can also be used for wildlife creatively, abstract images. all kinds of stuff. But where it really started was with landscapes. Um, and I mean that's really how I define it. I think it's just a cool way to give something a different look than what you're used to.
Right. I guess if I had to define it, I'd probably say something similar, but to put a little spin on your definition, I'd say it's just any shot that's I wouldn't really tie it down to a shutter. You're right about like the tenth of a second. I would consider that a slow or a long exposure. But I would just say it's like any shot that's isn't static movement. So if you got like a horse, I don't know, moving running through a field, and you got it like on a nice, let's say 2,000th of a second shutter, it's like that's going to be freezing the frame pretty crap. What do you call crap? I just messed up. I'm sorry. I'll just start talking from the.
Okay.
So, for example, it's like if you had a horse running through a field and you're shooting at like a 2,000th of a second, that's pretty fast, and you're going to capture that movement, the action as it's just moving and running across the field, basically. And if you slow it down, to a point where it's blurring that motion, that would consider that a long exposure. So yeah, there's definitely slower, shutters, but like I just say it's like the movement itself. So if it's a waterfall or a bird flying away, it doesn't really matter. It's a longer exposure, literally. That's how I describe it, at least.
Yeah, it's very. People will say it's unnatural, but especially kind of those mid-range, long exposure shutter speeds, they're very realistic to what the human eye sees, versus like the 1/2000th of a second. Like
Hmm.
that'll make a nice wildlife shot, but that's just not what the human eye sees, really.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not like it's unnatural per se, because it's literally showing the movement of like an animal or a waterfall or whatever. But yeah, it's like you just said, it's not really what the human eye sees. So I think that's why why we're so drawn to these kind of images and taking them and appreciating them is just because it's so different from what the human eye can really see and grasp, I guess, with reality.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The only time I would say it like goes into like unnatural would probably be like those really long ones where the water's like glass. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But, but I
I
don't
mean,
think there's anything particularly wrong with that. It's just different looks for different styles of photographs.
yeah, I mean, like when you say like glass like effect, I imagine like the 10 stop neutral density filter, and it's like just a clear, still, like a shallow lake or something, and it's in black and white. That's kind of like what I picture, I guess. But yeah, you're definitely right about that. It's has a little bit different spin, I guess, on a longer exposure because the movement's very subtle, but it's not really overtly, I guess, obvious to the viewer.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, what kind of subjects do you like to shoot with long exposures? I know a bunch of different people use them for different reasons. So, what do you
Hmm.
like?
I mean, it goes without saying, but first and foremost would be waterfalls. That's probably, I'd say 95% of what I shoot long exposure wise. And there's quite fortunately here in Ohio, Southwest Ohio, there's like a huge abundance of waterfalls. Particularly if you're trying to chase waterfalls, or I call it waterfall hunting, or there's many different ways you could say it. I'd say springtime is like a go getter. That's a good time of year. Just because the snow's melting away, it's making the waterways flow a lot more with all that extra water. And you're going to find waterfalls in different like spots that you may not have ever even previously seen if it's been a dry season or it's just frozen up for the winter. So I recommend spring. And if you can choose a nice overcast day when it's rainy, that's going to be probably the perfect time to take these beautiful waterfall shots. At least, yeah, ones I like to take at least. Everyone's, I guess, opinion's different. But yeah, I just say recommend that. I mean, you can obviously shoot some waterfalls all times a year. It's just whatever you choose, like compositionally speaking, or what colors in the background, everything you want to look like. But yeah, I'd say
Mm,
spring and rainy days, and if you can, overcast, and it just all works out together with that green foliage,
yeah.
looking very moist, I guess, with all the rainwater all over it.
It's one of the few times that a kind of similar color palette works. Like there's in those summer scenes, there's really not that much contrast in color, but it just
Mhm.
works. Like the aesthetic you get from that.
Yeah.
And with waterfalls and like what you mentioned with seasons as well. You can also get cool winter ones. Like I know like icy waterfalls are very desirable.
Hmm.
Cool shots.
I guess the good thing about those is you really don't need to take a long exposure, though. That's the nice thing about
Yeah.
those. When they're frozen
Uh-huh.
up, it's like I doubt they're going to be moving, so
Uh-huh.
it's a
One
little
100th of a second. Yes.
handheld image
Uh-huh.
stabilization.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I will say in summer it's a little bit trickier, like you just said, Henry, with shooting waterfalls. Is that they usually dry up by then because it just gets too hot and humid and everything. But there's a few that stick around for the summer. Probably like I would say the biggest ones, the ones that just flow from bodies of water, mouths of rivers and big creeks and stuff. Those might be flowing in the summer, but still they might be diminished greatly in their amount of water that's flowing through it. So I would say, yeah, definitely spring, probably March, April, May. Maybe you can get
Oh
some
yeah.
good ones in June. Depends on where they are, but like I said, it really what matters most is the rainy days. You want to go after a really heavy rainfall, or even if it's raining that day, just go out anyways. It's gonna be great flowing.
Mhm.
Just protect your gear, of course, but it's worth it.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, but make sure you have neutral lighting. Doesn't have to be like completely like gloomy, but make sure
Oh
there's
yeah,
not too much of like harsh shadows on the waterfall and stuff.
yeah. It's just gonna be less desirable, I think, of a photograph. So
Uh
it's just
yep.
if it was like a bright sunny day and it was spraying and raining, I don't know, sun showers, I guess, but um, yeah, it just wouldn't be quite worth it, I guess, to me. It just
Mm.
wouldn't be worth it for these kind of subject matter.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. We're coming up on the season. I've already got like a list of ones I want to go to.
There's a handful, especially some like older ones, older shots I've taken like 3, 4 years ago by now. I'm going to revisit them hopefully, and they're going to. I hope I can take better photographs of them now, some updated ones, if you will. But yeah, same here. I have a few that are kind of in my area that I've found from like really obscure websites or just like forums, I guess. Just talking about these different falls, and I'm stoked. Always finding new ones is really exciting to me. So
Yep.
looking forward to it.
I have a I have a very like soft place in my heart for waterfalls. My first photography award was a waterfall image, so
Oh, cool,
it'll always
cool.
be important to me.
Yeah,
And my
there's.
last photography award as well,
That's great.
but it was best affair at the Kentucky State Fair, so I was pretty proud
Oh,
of it.
cool. Cool. Yeah, right on. I almost applied to my county's fair because I saw they had like a little art gallery, like a pop up
You
tent.
should, you should.
Maybe I'll put my waterfall shot in there. No, it's cool. That's cool
Why
though.
not?
Yeah, exactly. It's just something cool about. I don't know. It's like a subject matter that like it's not just going to shut off in front of you. At least I don't think it will. So like you can just hunker down for an hour or two and take your time. At least I have. And you can take your
Yep.
time and just slow down, really think about your compositions, and work the scene in front of you. And it's something about like the loud water, the rushing. If it's like white water or something, it's like it's almost comes kind of meditative and calm after a while. Like you get used to
Mhm.
that loudness, I guess. So, but they're just so
Yeah,
much fun to take. It's just so
and
much fun.
there's like natural like compositional shapes built in. Like sometimes you'll get like
Oh
S
yeah,
curve waterfalls or just nice patterns in the water, and you're almost guaranteed to get a good foreground, whether it be like bubbles or water streams or just rocks. Like
yeah, big
you
old
can
boulder right in the
really get a good shot.
foreground. Yeah,
Oh yeah, oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'll
I
be
know.
doing a lot of this. Yeah.
Right in the middle of the foreground. Yeah, dead center. Yeah, it's and like I said with the rainy days, is it really does like I said in spots you never even imagined would open up these waterfalls and these flowing streams, and it's pretty cool because the more water, the better flowing. It's going to show all these different cascades if there are any, and just all that sort. So it's just neat to see where these kind of things, I guess, these natural phenomenons pop up and they just flow out. It's pretty neat. So
Mm.
it's fun chasing them, like I said.
Yeah. So I was thinking about kind of like shutter speed, like long exposures, particularly for waterfalls, because it's an issue that people actually get like trip up, can't speak, tripped up on frequently. So do you tend to go on kind of the longer side of long exposures for waterfalls, or what's kind of your methodology for that?
Okay, good question. Yeah. So like the bigger the fall, like if it's like a really intense whitewater that's like, I don't know, let's say it's like an amphitheater kind of drop off, like in a gorge, and it's got like a nice big flow to it. I would use a much longer shutter, or much slower rather. And if it was like just a small little trickle of a creek or a stream, and I wanted to get a long exposure, I'd use a much faster shutter. And simply because that slower shutter is going to really elongate the flow of the bigger falls. And so a creek really doesn't need a shutter of like a few seconds necessarily if it's just like a little trickle, down the stream and down your frame of your composition. So, that's just my choice, but that's usually how I approach them. Is the bigger they are, the more longer exposure I do for them.
Yeah, that's a good strategy. It's kind of like a case by case thing. I feel like you really just gotta
Yeah.
like experiment. Because I know some people, and when I say some people, this is really just me. When I first got like my first set of ND filters, I would slap it on, do ISO 100 f11 and whatever like shutter speed like balanced the exposure I would use on a waterfall.
Oh man.
So depending on the lighting, I got different waterfall looks, and it just wasn't the most effective thing. Then I realized that I shouldn't be afraid to bump up my ISO. Like I use 2000 ISO for wildlife and get great images. Why can't I, use it for landscapes? So I realized that so I could, get some nice different shutter speeds to show the texture and motion.
Right, right. Yeah, that those settings you just mentioned probably work for maybe one waterfall in particular, but like every other one's gonna be so different. At least I would think. Each one kind of delivers its own compositional challenges and everything. It's like you really have to find what works best for them, given like the conditions in front of you.
Yep. That's what it's I mean, that's what's really important with that. For like waterfall, do you ever find yourself in like treacherous conditions with waterfalls? Like
Um,
any like weird situations with
like
it?
dangerous, like you
Uh
fall in. Yeah, I mean, there's a few in particular. There's this pretty decent gorge habitat, like a big gorge. It's at a nature reserve near me, and it has like a big creek. And there's like this part where it's like not so secretive now because I've seen a lot of photographers in my area have photographed this one doing long exposure. But back in the day, like 3 years ago, when I started going here a lot for these kind of images, it has these giant big boulders that you can stand on, but they're kind of like pointed ones. And if it's like I said, a rainy day, they're kind of slippery. So if you don't have the right traction, you could easily fall in. And it's not deep. I don't think it's like deep enough to drown in, but like it's enough that you could just drop your camera and stuff, which obviously I don't want more of. And so there's a few situations you just have to use your best judgment. If it's like rainy and you see this really shiny, slippery rock, like and even if you have like the most well traction boots. Like it's just I don't know. You just have to use proper judgment and don't overstep your boundaries. And yeah, just I don't know. Anytime I like jump to a place, like a jump over a creek or something like that, it's like I like to make sure if I can turn around, I can make a safe and easy exit back. You know what I mean? Like if
oh
I
yeah.
because there's like one there's
That's
one time
crucial.
yeah, there's one time I was wearing like little running shoes, like not waterproof, and it was a rainy day. And I was actually cycling out to, I think it was like September. It was like cycled out to a place near me, local nature reserve, and there's like a creek there. And I was doing some like long exposure because it was nice, overcast, like I said, rainy day. And I like jumped down, and I was like, I cannot get up back where I started. It was only like a couple feet, but still, it was just like everything's wet, and slippery. And I'm like, I'm just going to trudge. I'm really going to have to run through this creek just to get out of this place,
Mhm.
So and yeah, just be smart with it. I've never been in any situations where I was like truly like drowning or in danger. But just yeah, use your best caution. I mean, some shots you may think are worth the risk, and I'm not going to say I've never been in that situation where I have like we'll say risk myself or my gear just to get a shot. But like more often than not, it's not going to be worth it. Your life or something, of course.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. I don't know if you saw Gavin Hardcastle's latest video, but he
Uh,
literally wades through frigid water to get a shot of a frozen waterfall in like Vancouver Island, Canada, which is freezing, absolutely freezing. I don't know what he was thinking, but he had his camera. He didn't even have his camera protected. He was just holding it on the tripod, and the camera was like
he
inches from the
breaks
water,
stuff
and
all
he
the
was like,
time.
I don't know,
He's
he was up to
hilarious.
his waist. Yeah.
Oh man,
Um,
I haven't done
yeah.
that in years. Been there
Yeah,
before.
I've never luckily been in that situation, but I do deal with the slipperiness that can get pretty treacherous
Well,
sometimes.
he puts himself in
Um,
that situation, I think, too.
yeah.
Yeah.
The tip that I use is using your tripod as a support to get down, like a, say it's at the bottom of a cliff, like kind of use your tripod a little bit to help, because if you have a sturdy enough one, it could be like a nice walking stick. Make sure you don't slip.
I just probably wouldn't keep my camera on the top because I make it kind of top heavy.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
Um,
imagining like slipping anyways and having that thing just smack right in the ground or something
uh-huh.
terrible. Yeah, I
Yeah.
wouldn't recommend that. But I will say it's
And
like
then
there's a few. I think there's a couple instances where like if it's like a really big waterfall or you just happen to be like way up close to it at the base of it, you're gonna get a lot of mist if there's a lot of wind. Even if there's no wind, it still can kick up water and mist onto your camera gear. So just bring like cloths and necessary, I guess like a rain jacket, even if you need to. Even if it's like a nice normal day that's not raining, it's gonna still kick up that mist. So if you don't want to get wet, I'd recommend a rain jacket or a poncho, and cloths for like cleaning your filters and lenses because you might have to do that. I've been in this situation a lot. You might have to clean those and wipe those after every exposure just because it just kicks up so much water and debris onto your gear.
yep. And make sure you have a nice dry place to put your camera bag as well.
Hmm.
Whether it be near you or even if you can position it maybe above the cliff. Um, I don't know why I'm saying cliff, but above like the area. Just make sure it's out of the way. Make sure it can't slip, um, and just make sure you can keep everything dry. And I
Yeah.
would say don't be afraid to go in the creek as long as you're not disrupting like a natural habitat, and as long as you have like the proper gear. Yeah.
Yeah, always like test the water. Like if you're going, let's say the water's going like left to right, and you're going like against it, like sorry, if you're going like through it, you want to make sure the speed isn't like so much that you just get swept away because it could happen, of course. So just start out with like the shallowest of creeks and see how well you can really, I guess, handle that kind of physical fortitude, if you will,
Yep. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
wear wading boots.
Fortitude is essential in those creeks. You do not want to fall in.
Yeah, you want some good feet. So going on some jogs or a nice run. Do some cycling.
Uh,
There you go.
yeah.
I'll get your legs, muscles going. There you
Just do some foot exercises.
go. Some squats.
Whatever those are.
Do your squat. I mean, like, if we're being honest, like, seriously, like, you have to really be physically adept to, like, hike and with all your camera gear. Like, it takes a lot, you know?
Yep.
I wouldn't really
You gotta have a
say
good back.
definitely that if you carry a lot. But yeah, it's like, I wouldn't say I necessarily train. I mean, I do work out and exercise, of course, but, like, I wouldn't necessarily say I train to, like, go on a photo op. Like, but still, it's like you have to be kind of physically adept. Yeah. Because you can't just, get swept away in a creek or a river. I don't know. But just, yeah.
Especially for us wildlife and landscape photographers.
You
It's
want to carry around the
almost double
biggest
the gear
telephoto.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess in this case, I wouldn't really use a big telephoto though for these long exposure, unless it was like a mile away. I don't know.
Have you ever experimented with that, like some close up long exposure stuff?
I've done some telephoto, smaller telephoto, like 150 mil or less, I guess. But like it's a weird look, and I don't really like it because telephoto compresses the distance, obviously, of your subject, foreground, mid, and background. But like I kind of like the depth of a wide angle in this case. Waterfalls usually
Mm.
look, and especially if it's like a really really drop, like a big drop off of one, sometimes I have to back up so far as I can safely get, like especially if it's a railed off location at a, let's say, nature preserve, and I can't go off trail. There's a few instances where I had to like back up as far as I can, get that wide angle, just right, and it's still barely enough to capture like from the base all the way to the top, and that's in a vertical composition, of course, orientation. But yeah, I find that to be trickier with a lot of them if they're really tall ones. Is just finding that nice, I guess, spaciousness of it, just to capture the whole thing in one frame.
Yeah. I think there's a place for both, but I agree with you. The
Yeah,
depth is really important for that. Uh,
yeah,
you can, what you said about the compression, like a waterfall, like the way the rocks stick out and stuff, the telephoto really just kind of ruins that. It just kind of makes it kind of a flat image.
it goes against like because the long exposure, like we said, it's already kind of like tricking your eye into seeing something that isn't there. Like, but it is. It's seeing it. Sorry, it's seeing it in a way that's not really normal. We'll say. But the telephoto, I feel like just adds another layer of distraction on there, where I'm like, it just has like a weird kind of hypnotic feel to it, and I'm like, not really into that, I guess. But obviously, it's a creative choice, and some people might like that. So, it just really depends. But yeah, I like more depth than I guess a long exposure if I can. So that usually means shooting with a smaller aperture, a wider angle if I can, and just going from there.
I know the know Alistair Ben. I've mentioned him on the show before. He does some really close up, long exposure waterfall stuff. Like he is so like in tune with the intimate landscape that he won't even shoot the wide angle. He'll just go right into the tiny, tiny details of like the tiniest little rapid, and it works. I mean, it works. He does nice long exposures. Yeah, it's definitely a different style.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying like me or anyone's exempt from like you shouldn't try this, but I'm just saying it's like if you want a classic, we'll say postcard, dare I say, like photograph of like a waterfall, you're probably gonna shoot a wider angle. But yeah, of course, be creative and like if you want to get in closer and tighter with your framing, yeah, just get that shot of just the water flowing. I've done that many times, and it's a lot of fun to get that kind of more abstract side, which we can touch upon that here in a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I guess we can do it now if you want, really.
Okay.
We talk a lot about waterfalls, but yeah, I will just mention quickly, like don't discredit creeks. I love creeks. There's so many around here in my area because Ohio doesn't have big mountains, but we have lots of waterways. So yeah, don't discredit like rivers and other smaller waterways that maybe at first glance aren't much, but like they're still very beautiful. And you can find plenty of little areas and what they call babbling brooks where there's just shallow water and to make photographs of long exposure of that. So yeah, definitely check those out if there's any in your area. Do your research and see if there's any good ones. I'd like to think there is, for most people. And
Yeah,
then
and
you go ahead.
oh, yeah, you really don't need the height of the waterfall. Like
No,
like you said, don't discount creeks. Like you can get long exposures of rapids, and it can create just as engaging of an image.
I feel like people like the big drop offs, the big waterfalls, stuff that's just really grand and massive. But like, I really appreciate the, I guess, more intimate kind of long exposure landscapes of just the smaller creeks. You get down on that really low ground level and photograph them as there are. There's something special about them that are still, like you said, worthwhile to take an image of.
Yeah, definitely don't discount them.
Mhm. Yeah, so
All right, so
I want to touch
oh,
upon I want to touch upon abstracts just a little bit. So, like we said, yeah, using like a smaller telephoto, maybe like a zoom lens, and getting some tighter shots of the waterfall. Maybe just the water itself, or maybe just a small sliver of the entire falls. That could be a cool technique to use. And then your settings will be kind of consistent, I'd say, with that. It might be a little bit different depending on your lens, obviously. And then other abstracts you could do are just like get creative with it. You could be like, if there's a bird flock that's like flock of birds that's just taking off from the ground, get a long exposure of that, and you get the wing beats and all the motion and commotion with it, that comes with it. So there's just lots of different techniques. That's stuff I don't do too much, but that's simply because the opportunities haven't really been presented in front of me. But it's stuff to look out for. So it's not just waterfalls with this kind of technique.
yeah, with the bird flocks, if you're having trouble getting a bird in flight, um, why not try to miss the focus, intentionally and get that nice blur.
Mhm. Or even like prop the camera on a tripod and let I'm not gonna say throw a rock at a flock of geese or birds, but like just like let them, I don't know, let's say they do take off by some happenstance, like just let that kind of dictate the shutter, and have it like on that static position like on a tripod.
That's a good idea. Like a
Yeah.
waterfall esque image of birds. With
There you go.
even maybe even throw an ND filter on there.
There you go. Yeah, except the rising instead of falling too. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
and then another, I guess we could touch upon another. I guess people really, I'm not sure if you really consider this a long exposure, but panning, if you're going for like a blurred
Ah,
motion. I know you touched upon this a little bit already, but yeah, like if you're tracking a bird in flight, most people would think to get just a nice right in the middle of the movement, like bird in flight shot, I guess. But like maybe you should go see something more creative sometimes, whether it's a mistake or not, I guess. But go for like a nice pan of it, but get that blur in there as well to imply the movement. So it's just stuff to like try out and experiment with.
Yeah, that's I've never really done panning, but I have seen a lot of good stuff with it. Like deer, I've seen a lot of deer panning shots where they follow the deer.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That'd be good. Yeah. Yeah, just like find. I'm trying to think of like a good beginner example because honestly, I don't do this kind of technique too much, but I really want to do more of. And I'm thinking like maybe like if you have like a local community park with like a pond and you have some ducks and geese that might take off and land a lot, maybe try that. If that's too fast, maybe go for like an egret or something. I don't know. Or even deer can sometimes, if you catch them, I'm not saying chase them, but like if you catch them by surprise or something and you're close up and ready, you might get some of them running away, of course, from you. And you can take some kind of panning type shots as well.
That's definitely a good idea.
Hmm.
A lot of people tend to restrict panning to like the automotive field of photography, but it can definitely be used in nature frequently.
Yeah, and obviously, like I feel like it goes without saying, but like if you're using to freeze the frame, freeze the action and movement, you'd use a really fast shutter, like a thousandth of a second plus, or more. But if you want to like pan and slow it down, you probably use, I'm going to guess, like something like 500th of a second for like a fast moving bird or something. Just trying to experiment and see what you can really come up with. There's no camera saying that really dictates how to do this technique. It's just whatever the situation implies for.
And there's really no technically perfect image, so
Oh no,
if
no.
it's blurry, that's your creative intent. I mean, unless that's not what you meant to do, but if you're trying to do it, that's your creative goal.
Yeah, definitely. It could be a mistake, but maybe you should just sometimes roll with the punches. It could be a fun photo to edit later on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
So what? Uh, so we kind of touched on like the different shutter speeds you can use for long exposures,
Mhm.
but it's kind of important to balance your ISO and aperture. So what do you generally do for that? Like, what are your rules?
Okay, ISO, I would say the lower the better, which like pretty much goes for most imagery anyways, but like the lowest I can get it within reason. So if I want to keep like retain the shadows and like let me paint a picture, I guess. So it's like green foliage, spring summer day. It's kind of overcast lighting. There's some sun peeking through, but like there's nice deep shadows. I'm deep in this woodland, and there's this waterfall, pretty big one. I want to retain as much shadow as I can because I just don't want it to be overexposed and just too bright below the highlights, of course. So I'd probably keep it like an ISO 200 or lower. Obviously, I could bump it up to 400, 640, 500. Just keep it around that range. Nothing probably higher than 800, just because that'd be too bright for my taste. But I definitely want to keep the shadows in that case, and the lower the better is always great because, like I said earlier, if it's like a big waterfall, I'm probably going to be using a slower shutter, which would let in more light. And so if you have the ISO really low, you can further slow down that shutter as well. And so with aperture, I kind of keep it in the mid range. I guess you could say it's on the smaller aperture end, which would obviously put a greater depth of field. So I'm probably around f9, which I guess is still pretty wide, but like I would go all the way up to like f16 if I need to. Obviously, that depends on the depth of the scene in front of me, but every
Mm-hmm.
situation is different. But those are just kind of like my general, I guess, benchmarks for this kind of imagery as well.
Yeah, so that sounds pretty good.
What would you
Um,
do?
when when it comes to me, I usually f8, f11. Um, I'm not like a big like f14, f16 guy. Like, I really like focus stacking. I do it a lot. Um,
Okay.
it's pretty easy to do on like Photoshop. So I'll tend to do f8 because on my lenses it's like the sharpest point you can get. After that, it starts to degrade a little bit.
Right.
So I'll do f8. I'll focus on usually 3 points in the waterfall scene. Obviously, one on the waterfall, one on kind of the mid ground, and then one on the immediate foreground, which is like right in front of the lens.
Hmm.
And yeah, that usually comes together and produces a pretty nice shot. Sometimes I'll even do more images. It just really depends on kind of what the scene is and kind of like what the distance is between the subjects.
Right.
And for ISO, it's I'd like it to be at 100 ideally because it's the best dynamic range. But if there's a shutter speed that lends better, I'm not afraid to bump it up anymore. And I'm comfortable going up to like 2000 for landscapes on my camera. So
Yeah, if your camera allows it, I mean, if it allows it and you like the noise, I guess, with it. So do you,
mm,
like, let's say, because you said I mean, you shoot wider a little bit, probably more than I would comfortably with this kind of image or subject matter. But like, if the waterfall is in the background, let's say, would you obviously focus on the water there? But like, would you drop kind of the depth of field, I guess, out of focus in the foreground a little bit more? I mean, is that kind of like a
um,
creative choice for
it
you?
really depends on what the foreground is. So I do that sometimes where I just focus on the waterfall, f8 or f11.
Hmm.
It really just depends because if there's an interesting foreground, I'll want to get it all in focus. But if
Right.
not, I'll try to get it in one shot.
I guess F11, excuse me, F11. Cut that out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I guess F11 is really kind of more on the smaller side. It's kind of in the mid range, so like I guess it's not going to make it too soft. But yeah, I'm just imagining like there's a big rock or boulder right in the foreground, and it's going to be kind of blurred at the edges of the frame. But obviously that could be a creative choice. Like there's people that probably shoot waterfalls that shoot wide, for all we know, and they make great photographs that way. So it's just really a stylistic choice, like most of this is.
I try to. The reason I really use f8 and f11 is I try to blur out the uninteresting parts. Like I
Hmm.
want to get the majority of the scene in focus. So if there's like a rock, maybe a log in the midground, and then the waterfall in the background, I want to get that all in focus. But then when
Right.
you kind of look at the edges, there might be some like grasses or just
Twigs.
things that don't, yeah, twigs that don't
Unwanted
need to be in
branches.
focus.
I hate
Mm.
it. I hate
Like the
it.
mess, like the mess of the forest. Like you don't always want that in focus, and kind of when sometimes when you go to f16 or 22, it can get really this kind of undesirable, almost too in focus look.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, I
you know what
definitely
I
agree
mean?
with
Like
you.
the
And I guess
yeah.
that's one of the many drawbacks of shooting wide angle landscapes like this is that you do include a lot of nonsense and distractions. But I guess that makes it part of the challenge as well, is that you have to kind of eliminate them as best you can, or even just later on in post, just clone them out. So it is tricky though with those, and a lot of waterfalls, which this is a whole topic in and of itself, in my opinion. But a lot of waterfalls are really not that scenic. A lot of them are really beautiful and stuff, but a lot of them are just kind of in these really just not good looking parts. Even if the flow is like very beautiful itself, they're just the backdrop, I guess, surrounding it's not really quite as we'll say scenic as some of the other ones are.
Yeah, you just really have to work with what you got. Some environments you can go wider, show the forest. Others that maybe in a suburban area, and you really got to just focus on the waterfall more.
Hmm. Yeah, it
That's
depends.
yeah. With my new 1635, I haven't done any waterfall stuff yet, but I have done like wide angle scenes, and there's a lot that gets in your frame. 16 millimeters on full frame is like crazy wide. Like it's insane. So much, so wide. It's very different from 24 millimeters. Like it's a
Oh
vast
yeah,
difference.
yeah.
So that's definitely going to be interesting when I start getting into waterfalls. Um, you got to keep in mind when you've got like a wide angle lens, it if you angle it a certain way, like if you angle it down, it'll make the background smaller and the foreground larger,
Hmm.
really exaggerate it. So you have to keep that in mind. If you want to prominently show your waterfall, I wouldn't suggest pointing it down because then your main subject will become a random boulder instead of the waterfall. So you just really got to keep that in mind when you're doing that.
Well, that can emphasize that certain natural feature. Like maybe you do want that boulder to be really prominent in the
Hmm.
in the center, in the foreground. But yeah, definitely in this case, it depends. Like I've taken shots where it's like that foreground's really emphasized by that lower angle. But yeah, naturally, if you want to just
Yeah,
like if you want to shoot a waterfall dead on, you want that camera, the focus plane. That's basically you want the camera to be level, eye level, straight on with the falls, because it's going to introduce that perspective distortion that can be very ever present with these kind of things, these really tall subjects in a lot of cases.
and it really all depends on how close that waterfall is. Like if your foreground object is close and then the waterfall's close, you should be fine tilting your lens down because naturally it won't be as small. But if it's like across like a creek, you should really point it straight ahead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense though. Do you do you use any filters? I mean, it's probably an
Oh
obvious
yeah.
question, but like
Oh yeah.
what kinds do you use, I guess, in particular? Because
So I've got three. Well, I've got two right now. Um, but I've got a six stop, which also has a built-in polarizer. So it's a six stop polarizer filter. And I've got a 10 stop. Six stop is like really is my waterfall filter. I never find myself needing a 10 stop. I think that's way too long for waterfalls. I really don't like the completely blurred out look of waterfalls unless it's like a like really soft light fine art situation.
mhm.
But mostly I like the six stop. It still shows some movement, but you get like that 1 second, like 2 second shutter speed range on like a cloudy day. And that has a built-in polarizer, which I would say is essential for waterfalls to get those reflections out, unless you want them, of course. But get those reflections out, saturate those greens, and get that ugly glare off of the waterfall. So I use that. I've got a polarizer coming in the mail because I've never had a separate polarizer, which was quite the limitation for a while. So I would always have to put my ND filter on to polarize the scene. Uh, that didn't affect me too much with waterfalls, but with other things, that was a bit of a challenge. But yeah,
Are
so make
those?
sure you have a polarizer and an ND filter.
I guess I will say as a caveat, like if you're just starting out with long exposure, you don't really need those filters. I mean, it's I guess that's a hot take, but like you really don't. But like
Mm,
But I will say is like it's especially at the very least get a nice quality polarizer. You don't really need a neutral density for most waterfalls, but like to make great shots, I think. But a polarizer at least I feel like is like near essential for this kind of imagery. But are
I
those
would
like
say if sorry,
what's that?
uh,
Are those circular
uh,
filters that you're using?
yeah, I use screw-on circulars. I bought I buy them all in 82 millimeter filter size because that's the size of my largest lens, and then I
Mhm.
have step-up rings to adapt down. Because
Okay.
I buy the Polar Pro filters, which are fairly expensive. So I don't want to buy a set for each of my lenses.
Right.
So I just use step-down rings.
Those are good quality, at least from what I heard that brand. Yeah. Do you lose any
Yeah.
stops to light for using
Apparently,
those? The step down
hmm?
adapters?
No, you don't. No, they're just pretty thin, nice rings that don't get stuck. And main reason I bought them is they're very future proof. Like someday I plan to upgrade to maybe like a 45 megapixel camera or something down the road, but someday. And these filters can apparently resolve 400 megapixels, so I think I can use them on all my
I
cameras.
think so. Yeah. Is there any vignetting with those as well?
No, I was very surprised. I was
Really?
testing my 16 millimeter and 16 on full frame. I mean, man, that if that's filter's gonna vignette, that'll be on that. So,
Yeah. The
no
white's the
vignetting.
white.
Yeah, and that
That's
was even
awesome.
with a step down ring, which can also introduce vignetting.
That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for what I use, yeah, I do use neutral density and polarizers a lot, especially for this photography mainly. I think I use, what do I use? Hoya filters. I believe that's how you pronounce them. And I use HRT polarizers. Mine are circular like yours, Henry. They're like screw-on ones. You can always get those sheet of glass ones that drop in a slider. I think they're called, I don't know what, are they called slider filters or something? I
I'm
forget
not
the
sure.
I forget the name of them honestly, but off the top of my head now. But I use the screw-on ones as well, just because I find them to be well enough for my purpose. And yeah, so I use polarizer ones, a nice quality one. All my lenses have them, but like I said, I probably use wide angle focal lengths the most with this kind of photography. And neutral density is something I really don't pay attention much to, but I will just say maybe get like one or two good ones, like one that's like a three stop or a five stop or even more, and just get something that's really dark for those, every once in a while kind of falls that you might find or any kind of subject
Personally,
matter. Yeah.
I would suggest even 6 and 10, but that's just difference in artistic style. But yeah, maybe
Yeah.
three,
I was,
six, and
I was going to
10
say, yeah,
if you have the
the,
money.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I mean, it's like the darker you want it, but like you're going to prolong that shutter, of course. And I guess I will say, and this is also kind of a creative choice, I guess. I don't really want like a nice, or not nice, but like a just a white blob of like water. I want some
Yeah.
kind of detail to be retained in there. I want some, if it's
Mm.
blue, like I want some of that blue to show up in the photograph at the end. I don't want to just be like a white overexposed blob, or even if it's improper exposure. Like if it's just a white blob with no like lines or streaks, like what good is that really? You want to kind of imply that movement.
Yep.
It just looks kind of
I
awkward that way.
rarely, yeah, I rarely use that 10 stop for the waterfalls. I will say, it's mostly just for like seascapes or like lakescapes
Right,
to
right.
get that nice like glass like look. And also for clouds. People forget that you can blur out clouds with like really
Yeah.
long filters.
Yeah, and that's a cool technique. I really haven't done much of that, but it's on my like list of shots to take someday, I guess. Stuff to just
Uh,
experiment with. But yeah, doing a long exposure of clouds is really cool. At least the examples I've seen. And it shows that movement as well. So especially if it's like a fast moving cloud day, like after a but other than that, I have no announcements, I don't think. I just keep posting on YouTube lately, so check that out there. Yep, thank you. Thank you so much for watching the Owl Outdoors Photography Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the video version on YouTube as well. You can subscribe down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.